understanding the technology that powers the money is essential. Knowing the business drivers that inspire how the money is made is crucial. Bridging the gap between the mind of the technologist and the mind of the business is monumental. That is what TBF is all about. Let's start this never-ending conversation. It's time.
Happy Friday. I'm back with another episode of the Tech Behind FinTech. Today's episode, Confessions of a FinTech Marketer, the good, the bad, and the AI. You see what we did there, right? I have my guest joining me today, Clemens Rychlik. Clemens, how are you today?
Thank you so much, Namdi. I'm very good. Very exciting to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right, excellent. Before we dive into the Tech Behind FinTech today, we're just going to do some housekeeping. We are streaming live from Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. We have another chat going from Instagram, but the guys on Instagram, go to the techbehindfintech.com and you can get the show live so you can see my face and Clemens' face, just not my face. So on that note, let's dive into it today. Confessions of a FinTech Marketer, the good, the bad, and the AI. I'm with Clemens Rychlik, co-CEO and co-founder of the BCN FinTech. Let me introduce you to my guest. I'm just going to read his bio, and we're going to jump into today's topic because I'm really interested in hearing what Clemens has to say. Clemens is the co-founder and co-CEO of the BCN FinTech, Catalonia's largest and Europe's fastest growing fintech community. Since 2022, they've brought together thousands of fintech professionals through panels, networking events, and a growing online presence. With a background in banking and finance, Clemens has moderated and spoken at numerous industry events and podcasts. He's also the COO at Hello Operator, a fintech-focused marketing agency helping clients across the globe with SEO content and smart AI integration. Welcome, Clemens. All right, look, without further ado, also, guys, comment and you'll be part of the show. So anybody who drops a comment on YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook, we'll add you to the show. We'll get your questions answered. So feel free to drop that in. So without further ado, let's jump into today's topic. Confessions of a FinTech Marketer. So question, right? Let's just start with the first question, right? What makes marketing for FinTech uniquely challenging, Clemens?
Thanks, Andy. That's a great question. The most interesting thing is that you have to keep in mind that when we talk about FinTech, you're not selling T-shirts, you're not selling cupcakes, you're selling basically anything involved around money, right? And money is something that's like it's a very sensitive topic. It's very personal. It has huge implication of people's lives. So obviously from like a branding perspective, it's heavily involved around trust. Like it's different if you buy like a T-shirt for, $20-$30, or if you try to make an investment that's, multiple tens of thousands or more. So the trust element is incredibly high, much more so than in any other industry, I think. And the challenging part with trust is, of course, also that like it's very hard to build up, but it's very easy to lose. So, for instance, if we even think back to the 2008 crisis that we had in terms of the economic crisis, there are still a lot of people who are still like mad at banks till this day, So it's really, really hard to win the trust back. So that's like a massive, massive aspect. Then the second part is there's a lot of regulation in the sector. So, there's a lot of things that you cannot really say, or that you have to be very careful how you phrase it. So there are like way more limitations and guidelines that you have to respect from, let's say, like a communication perspective. You have to be really, really careful with what gets out of there, because there can be a lot of, like, say, legal implication if you, overstep the boundaries there. And then there's the final aspect, in my opinion, which is the complexity. I mean, of course, we're not talking like, rocket science, but we do talk about a field where if you're dealing with, let's say, private consumers, they a lot of times don't have necessarily the whole financial education knowledge Unfortunately, in most countries, at least where I come from in Austria, now living in Spain, financial illiteracy is pretty high. So there's not as much knowledge for most people around like how loans work, how interest rates work, how this may affect, the housing market and this type of stuff. So you face kind of you have to keep in mind you face like consumers that need to have a bit more education when you communicate with them. And then on the other end, if you go into, let's say, the B2B side, you can very easily get into like very heavily niche industries where you're suddenly talking to perhaps utility companies and you're trying to explain to them a bit more technical things like, open finance APIs and why that's useful to them. So, it's a bit more complex in terms of the communication, and you have to really make sure you can nail it down to the level that people can understand based on where they are on the journey. So I think those three make it quite unique compared to other industries.
You know what? This is a good point, and I want to dive into each of those three topics. Because I like the analogy. It's like we're not selling T-shirts. I think in terms of verticals, and the you mentioned trust, right? I look at finance, I look at healthcare, and I look at food, right? Those are the in my head, and obviously travel, flying especially, right? So I like how we're starting with this trust topic first. So how does one, right, go about building trust?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. It's quite challenging because, especially if you talk fintech, by definition, most of the fintechs are rather innovative companies. They may be around less time than traditional banks. So from the get-go, you're facing kind of like a steeper curve in terms of building trust. Like banks that have been around for hundreds, 200 years or more, they have their loyalty, they have been around and been through all the ups and downs, everything that's been going on with the world. And fintechs are pretty much, let's say, the new kid on the block. So you'd kind of like try to make sure that people have trust, not only in what you're selling, but also that you're going to be around in 5 or 10 years, because that's like also a big risk with startups, especially. So there's like a big thing, which is kind of like, I think from a branding perspective, you want to make sure that you build this kind of like trust signals. So those can be things like, being heavily represented on social media with like genuine communication, so people can actually see you, they can hear you, they know that you're actually active, that you have a certain amount of employees to actually execute the work that you're doing. You want to also have, of course, if you can, so-called brand ambassadors, so maybe create some kind of community that can actually back you up in your day-to-day and maybe promote your services. Especially if we talk about like investment products. One thing that works really well there, if you think of from like a B2C perspective, is referrals. So, there's no better way than, having one of your trusted friends or your sister or your mom referring you like an app that they just use and they totally trust, and that worked really well for them. That's like one of the strongest signals you can have. So if you find ways to work with this kind of like referral communities, that's fantastic. And then it's a lot, from traditional branding, right? You want to make investment into PR. You want to make sure that you're associated with trustworthy companies, media, that people can read about you in the channels they actually active and that they trust. So you kind of like just try to be where your customers are and really try to make sure that they understand what you do, but also why you're doing it, and that you genuinely care about the end users, right? So I think that's like a part that's very easy to forget. We're going to probably get down to the messaging part a few times in this discourse. But a lot of this is like around this branding element. And I think a foundation of all of this is kind of like really doing the core work at the start in terms of your brand message strategy. So you really want to make sure that you actually have this kind of like North Stars, things like that sometimes is very underestimated because it's like a bad rap, things like, having a vision that sounds pretty abstract, but it's actually incredibly useful when you think from a communication perspective, because you want to make sure you have something that's incredibly consistent, right? Like after all, marketing, a lot of it is around, getting this like catchy slogans and phrases into people's heads. So you just need to make sure that when you have this great messaging, you really, repeat and repeat and repeat until people just associate you with that very, very aspect of your communication strategy.
So what it sounds like, right? So from a trust perspective, the being genuine, right? So I mean, the one advantage I see that fintechs have for being genuine is that usually in cases it's very niche, right? Banks, big broad. Fintechs are usually we're niche. We're targeting a certain end user and or certain whether that end user is B2C, whether it's B2B, but it's a certain function that we have. So being genuine and why you care about solving that problem for them sounds like a huge part of trust based on what you said.
Yeah, especially. And I think, like you said, it has to be genuine. Like you can't really fake it. And I think for this to really work, it's kind of like you really want to make sure you start at the top and actually do this groundwork, trying to identify what your vision and mission is. It sounds very abstract. And a lot of times when you speak with people, maybe that don't come from the marketing perspective, it's sometimes even maybe laughed or like frowned upon a little bit, but it is incredibly useful. And the only way to do that is like get together with kind of like decision makers in your companies, maybe with your sales team who speaks with the clients, actually interview your clients to also understand what they see. And then kind of like take all of this to have kind of like this North Star that guides you through your entire communication. That's incredibly, incredibly important.
So, I like that, right? Because I mean, it's almost like you're taking a step back and you're saying, okay, what do we believe in? What are our core values? What are we trying to solve? And I think sometimes people get caught up in, when they think about that, it's like you don't have the whole thing with the vision and the mission is not going to be solved tomorrow. It's not going to be solved next week. This is an ongoing effort of which we're striving to accomplish on a day-to-day basis. This is our North Star. This is what guides us. And because of that, it usually becomes easy to say no to certain things, certain opportunities that may come. If it's not in line with that vision, no, that's not what we do. Or certain potentially new customers that are not necessarily the right fit, right? It's easy to say no. So I think I like that. I think that's spot on in terms of that aspect of trust. You mentioned something else now in terms of constantly being in their face, right? So I'm like a bootstrap fintech, right? And I'm just starting off. It might be hard for me to have the advertising dollars, right? That bigger, more well-funded companies have. So how can I explore that aspect of trust?
Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty common challenge with any new companies, right? You have budget limitation, which is a legitimate, concern and challenge you have to overcome. I do think, of course, it depends a lot on the niche industry you're in. But in general, there are usually always some things that you can do. So at the start, if it's a smaller company, it's kind of like maybe more CEO driven or founder driven. You actually have a lot of advantages to trying to be very present at different events. I know there's a lot of opinions on events. We just had a FinTech marketing leaders event a few weeks ago. And one thing we discovered there is like, when we think events, a lot of times we think like these big conferences where there are like, thousands or maybe 10,000 of people attending. And it's really hard to actually reach the right audience. So when I think events, it's more like try to attend the ones that are actually really relevant to your audience and the one that people that you want to reach are actually interested in. So try to be like really niche. Sometimes even going to, an event that's only attended by 100 people can be much more powerful than one that has like thousands of people there. It's much more important that the right people are there, right? So if you can, I don't know, if you sell, for instance, to CFOs, then you're going to have much more advantage or benefits going to an event where you have maybe 20 CFOs rather than going to a big conference where there's 1,000 people, but maybe only 2 or 3 CFOs around there. So it's like a lot of time being very targeted. So I think events is pretty a good way because you can actually present your thought leadership. It's very personal, so people actually see the people behind the company. I think that builds a lot of trust as well, kind of like showing your face. That's huge. And then, of course, like there are ways to kind of like growth hack your way in almost anything, right? So even if you think PR, there are ways to, reach out, maybe get opportunities at podcasts, maybe contribute guest posts to different magazines. So there's a lot of ways there. And then you have also social media. And I think social media now, at least if you're in the B2B space, if you think LinkedIn, that's an incredibly powerful channel for any companies. And for fintechs in particular, when you start up and you're like the founder, you can actually have a lot of really great stuff that's valuable to tell on LinkedIn. And that way you reach your audience directly where they are. And of course, it does depend who your audience is. But I felt that in B2B, I've seen a lot of success having like a strong presence there in a B2B environment, like can really reach the right people. You can, of course, then, even if you have limited budgets, you can try to promote some of your own postings as well. But it's a space where you can really actually share value first, and that builds trust as well.
I like that, especially for bootstrap companies. So what I'm getting from that is, as the CEO, he has to be the main, he or she has to be the main spokesperson, really getting out, boots on the ground, and finding these opportunities to add value, introduce yourself, talk about the vision, talk about the company, talk about how you're benefiting end users. And also what I got from it, what you just said, which is interesting, is, there's certain conferences that has like thousands and thousands of people. You would think you get to meet so many different, potential partners, end users, and so forth. But what you're saying is you should prioritize the smaller ones with your niche target than the bigger ones. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, I would adjust it a little bit to tweak it. So I would maybe rephrase it to that you don't want to overlook the niche industries, the niche events. But in general, it's more about like trying to be very analytical about it and try to see what is the actual return on investment if I go to conference A or conference B. Because again, of course, if the big conferences are super, super expensive, you will have to generate much more sales to actually justify that cost, whereas a small retargeted one may most likely be much cheaper, and there you can have much more valuable conversation. So it's not necessarily that just the niche ones, the smaller ones are the better ones. It's more like you have to kind of like weight the return on investment on both of those and then decide.
I mean, the return on this investment is real, especially when you bootstrap it. Like, there are conferences now to entry fees like $3,000-$4,000 compared to a couple of hundred from a small one. So it's totally an ROI perspective. All right, I think I get the trust aspect. I love it. Let's dive into the regulatory space, right? One of the advantages that I think fintechs have over the traditional investment banks or bigger banks is that they're not subjected to as many regulatory constraints as, let's say, a big publicly traded bank, right? And I know that was like in articles from before. I was when I used to do more articles on this show. That was one of the issues certain bigger banks had, right? It's like, well, these guys are basically coming in, eating our lunch, but they're not bound to the same rules that we're bound to. So, obviously, things to do business with bigger banks like SOC 2 and regular and things of that nature, is obviously important. But when you say regulatory constraints, let's jump into that as one of the challenges.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so from personal experience, I have most of my work has been done in the European region. So there are quite a few regulations here that literally limit you and give you very clear guidelines on how you communicate. So, for instance, if you're in investment space, you have to be incredibly careful whenever you say something that may come across as a recommendation or a suggestion on how you should spend your money, because that can then be held liable in different court rulings. So you have to be super, super careful with that side of things. And then there are a lot of regulations as well in terms of transparency. So when if you offer, for instance, any financial products like loans, for instance, you have to be very clear about like what are the actual costs of the loan. Are there like any hidden costs associated to it? So you cannot just say, okay, hey, I have the lowest interest rate, but then secretly you add all this like opening fees, closing fees, maintenance fees. So at least in Europe, in Spain especially, there are quite strict rules about like transparency, and it is a limitation. But at the same time, it's actually something that helps us then to build trust, right? Because I think if you wanted to really play well, you want to be actually transparent about your costs for your users, so they can make the best decisions and not kind of like misguide them into something they don't really want to do. Because at the end of the day, it's building long-term relationships. If you want to have repeat customers, have referrals, then having this kind of like short-term focus doesn't work anyway. So in at least in these terms, I think the regulations is kind of like a healthy reminder, probably in the fintech industry, for all of the marketers that we actually want to be very transparent. We want to be honest and help users.
So I've done compliance work in terms of helping fintechs more in the US side, not ISO per se, but more of SOC 2 and helping fintechs achieve that SOC 2, become SOC 2 compliant. And one of the strategies in working with the sales teams is, I would say that, we can use the process and also getting SOC 2 compliant as part of our sales strategy, right? Because of what you just said, right? It's like, let's be totally transparent in terms of all of the different things that we're essentially adhering to, right? Let's because I always felt, and this is something I always taught to working with the sales guys, I always felt once we get to the part of due diligence, right? Let's overshare. Let's use that let's use that as a way to really brag about our the time that we took to secure everything, the time that we took to ensure that we're doing it at these standards, and let's overshare rather than waiting until we're asked a question. Let's be proactive in that approach. And in closing certain deals more in the B2B space, that was really helpful. And what also happened with that strategy, it limited the questions that the opposing on the other side, like their CISO or whoever, would ask, because we're being totally transparent. Like, but I felt that in times when we waited until they asked the question, and if we stumbled a little bit, it's like a thread, and they'll keep opening this thread.
Totally, yeah.
So I always like using certain compliance standards as part of the strategy to sell, as opposed to in the due diligence process, as opposed to hiding or waiting for them. No, let's have a meeting. Let's kind of say let's walk them through exactly everything that we're doing, even things that are not necessarily part of the compliance framework, like our securing our software development lifecycle, and now you're moving to how do you secure AI. But let's talk about these things that are not common or part of the standard compliance framework before they even ask the question. So I agree with you in the transparency aspect.
Totally. No, I love that you mentioned that, because I think when we talk about trust, a lot of it, when we go back to the trust element, is, from a legal perspective, yes, you can do the bare minimum to be compliant, just to get it done, and that's it. Or you can kind of like take the extra step and kind of understand, okay, what is this regulation that I want to achieve? And a lot of times it's done for a reason. It's to help the consumer, right? So if you're in a position to maybe do an extra step besides the bare minimum, then that's really powerful, and that's definitely something that you want to use in your communication, right? That you doing more than you're being asked for. You're not just doing things because it's the regulation. You're doing it because it's the right thing. I think that changes probably the conversations you can have. And I totally agree that when we talk about trust, like being open and honest and proactively sharing information, I think that's like a major element of trust. I mean, even if you think about the relationships, if you don't give away certain things and just wait until you ask, I mean, it's always the part that then maybe sounds a bit more suspicious with friends or with other people. And then, the more this accumulates, the more doubt this may create. So I think a lot of times, of course, within the limitations of what you're allowed to share or not from a business perspective, you don't want to give away your secret sauce. But a lot of times there's enough things that you can share and be really proud of in terms of compliance.
And it's interesting, right? In as we go through these things, so we have a third one to get into education, but as we go through it, I think and I'm just making the connections based on our conversation, right? It's real powerful when you can trace all of those things back to your mission and your vision, right? How do you make those synergistic connections, right? Like, we're doing X and it's in line with Y, but this is in line too, even though we're talking about regulation, we're talking about trust, but we do all these things because it's in line to our culture, right? And that can also kind of
Absolutely.
help drive the ball moving forward in terms of building the trust and so forth. Now, the last part that you said in terms of the uniquely challenging aspects, right? We talked about trust, we talked about regulation, now education, right? Because you're right, like some people are just not financially literate. So they're seeing some of these products, they're seeing some of these tools, and whether you're talking about the B2C space, obviously the B2C space is more, I would say that you need a lot more education because a lot of people are not necessarily sophisticated investors at all. In the B2B space, yeah, you're but a lot more sophisticated than that in that area in terms of understanding. But so let's dive into that. Like, what are your thoughts right now on the B2C space in terms of the education aspect?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of work that has to be done. From my experience in the countries that I've been living in, if I look at Europe, Austria, Poland, Spain, what I've seen is that in school we learn a lot of skills, but then there is no really subject around financial education, right? So unless maybe you just grow up in the right peers or you have family that has more experience there and can share it and educate you. You go out of school and you graduate, you get your first jobs and stuff, and then you don't really know much. Like don't really know how mortgages work. You don't know whether it's a good thing or bad thing to take a loan. For instance, in my case, I come from a family that moved from Poland to Austria, and there was like obviously needed to get started a bit in that country first and build from the ground up. So they had like this mentality that like, we just have to save, never take a loan. It's like, this like very bad thing. And then in reality, we learn over time that it can be a good thing. So I think there's so much to be done on financial education. I think it's a shame right now that it's not something that has more prominence in educational programs in schools, because I think it will be super, super important. Because it's absolutely crazy if you think about it. It's like financial decisions are probably some of the most impactful ones we ever make. And those are the ones we have almost the least amount of knowledge as we grow up. So there's so much to do there, because otherwise it's very easy for the financial companies that maybe don't follow transparency, don't follow about like genuinely helping you. It's very easy by them to kind of like manipulate you, or maybe let's call it a bit softer, make you take decisions that maybe not that are not in your best interest, right? So I think I'm a big fan of promoting financial education, even as a company, depending on what you sell. If it's in the B2C space, I really love the approach that a lot of companies do. Kind of like you have kind of like a lot of companies that try to really educate the market, so they understand that if they want to keep you in the long term, and then you bring other people back into the community and into the products, it's better for them to maybe lose a few customers that you could get on short-term profit, but build these long-term relationships that will create much more, lifetime value for your company. So there's a lot about this, like kind of trying to really help and generally care about their customer. I think in the long term pays off so much. And since financial education is a big hole, if you can step in there and actually help people, then that's like a big win, not just from a social perspective, but it ultimately helps you as a business too.
Like, let's dive into that, because you mentioned, growing up in Europe and the education system in terms of not teaching financial literacy, and I could say the same thing for the U.S. Right? Like my family immigrated here, but I was born in New York, grew up in that educational system, and you're absolutely correct. Now, in certain programs, whatever you choose to go, for me, it was more like math and science, right? Excellent there, but on the financial side, not so much, right? So you're right. So now you're out of college and you get your first job, but the things that are most important in terms of the basics, right? Unless you learned it from family, mentors, other people who guided you outside of school, you really don't know these things. And I think you used the right word. In certain cases, customers are manipulated, right? They're certain products are put in front of them and they don't really understand the pitfalls of it, and it's made to take advantage of them. And I mean, if we could even go back, because you mentioned it earlier, right, to the 2008 crisis, right? Like you're getting these loans, right, and you're not looking at the fine print that it's going to balloon at a certain point, but in the short term, you're able to use these loans. You buy a place that you can't afford under regular circumstances, and all of a sudden, and you don't have the necessary requirements that you would normally need to get it, and you do it, and then you're put in a situation now where you could potentially, well, not potentially, but a lot of people have lost their homes with these crazy upside down mortgages and so forth. And in that scenario, right, I would say that they didn't really fully grasp what was going on, because I remember that time. I remember someone telling me, yeah, I didn't go, like, it's someone who's a little bit more financially savvy, not necessarily in finance, but she was saying, yeah, I'm not going to do that. It doesn't make sense. Like, how am I going to be paying this little amount for this big loan? Like, it doesn't, like, the numbers just don't make sense. So yeah, I passed on it. Like that's what she was telling me, and a lot of people did it. So I 100%
Yeah.
agree with.
And it's so hard for them not to, because again, like if the knowledge background is limited, and then you see everyone else seemingly in the country doing that, you kind of like saying, okay, like my neighbor is doing it, so it's fine. I can also get a house, right? I just put a loan or mortgage, and I'm off the way, and everything's fine. But few people will tell you the downsides until they actually happen, and then when something happens, like the crash, then it's most of the time too late. And I think that's the unfortunate thing, that there are some companies, I think, still to this day that kind of like operate under this principle. They care more kind of maybe the quarterly profits, and then they kind of like lose that kind of like long-term thinking. And I said it at the start, this kind of like big crashes, when the trust is broken, then it's so hard to get it back up to, because people remember, and if it has such impactful effects on their lives, then I think there's almost no way they're going to trust you again. It's going to be really hard to get back.
We can even look at the last few years with all the different, on the crypto space, with the rug pulls, with a lot of the exchanges literally going out of business. And look, I'm going to admit it, right? Like it was a certain exchange. I'm not gonna mention their name right now, but it was like, oh, park your crypto here, and you're getting these great, it wasn't like buying and selling. Like I wasn't planning on selling. Oh, you're getting these great rates, return on it. So you're like, hey, it makes sense. And all of a sudden, they go bankrupt, right? And then in court for like a few years, and you're getting pennies on your dollar back as part of the settlement. Now, I would think to myself, I read the fine print. I'm pretty, overall, right? I think I get it, right? I've been doing this for a few years, been in the industry for a while, and got burnt. And it's just like, so, and then you look at it, and it was so crazy, because at the time when you tried to take your funds out, they put a lock on it, so you couldn't even move it out once you heard. So,
Yeah.
It happens.
Yeah, and I think that's a good case that you mentioned that, because I know we talked a lot about like financial, illiteracy and this type of stuff, but at the end of the day, trust is also something, we outlined some of the processes before. There's like a playbook out there. So if you have bad intentions, in theory, you can use this playbook to build up trust and then do something like a rug pull, right? So I think that's like, even if you have the knowledge, that means you could also fall victim to this kind of schemes, because, if they put, a lot of advertising out there, they have like also like famous, people out there. They maybe are really powerful on like referrals and reward people for what they do. I mean, it's really hard to see through that. I don't even know if it's entirely possible, but it is something, of course, that exists, and we can just try to be as best as possible at spotting those opportunities. But at the end of the day, you kind of like, it is about trust. Again, we have to trust.
And the crazy thing about it, in that situation that I mentioned, I mean, like, I was fortunate. I was in a situation where whatever was sitting there was sitting there. I said, move it. Okay, I lost. Life goes on, right? But, on a global perspective with this particular exchange, some people had their entire life savings tied up with them, right? And they lost it. And then they got back, I don't know, maybe 10 to 20% back on the settlement. So it was totally catastrophic. Because when I was reading the news, not from a local but from a global perspective, it was a global company, and I was like, wow, because they did it because when they were in that space, they couldn't necessarily, they were betting against their local currency. So they were like, you know what, the local currency is a bit shaky. I'll put it in crypto right now. These guys are giving good returns, and I'm going to go 100% in, and voila. So so I like what you said, right? In talking through the unique challenges, essentially you outlined how to build trust. Now, there are companies that can use that model, right, for nefarious purposes to build the trust with the intention that they're going to do a rug pull, with the intention that they are running some sort of scam. I mean, we look at FTX, and we look at all these different companies that did certain things, and it's hard to kind of see through that. And the sad thing about it is, once that's done and that trust is broken, not only is it broken for that particular company, the people who got wiped out, who might not have been as savvy, who might not have diversified, they're done, right? Even if a new fintech that makes sense, I'm good, it's back to my money underneath the mattress, right? So yeah,
Yeah.
that's a whole other situation. So, but I definitely like how you outlined it in terms of trust, regulatory standards, and education, because you have to basically educate the market. What do you feel is the biggest misconception people have about marketing in fintech?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, again, we've spoken about some of the differences. I think right now, a lot of the miscommunications are probably, the whole talk around SEO, like the future of SEO, whether it's still useful now or not. There's a lot of hype going around, of course, generative AI, especially Gen AI searches. So I think one of the biggest misconceptions I see right now is on the SEO side. I think people just declaring it officially for that and kind of seeing that the shelf life is maybe a couple of years or something, when the reality is quite different. There's like one study I think I saw recently from SEMrush. They polled the users. 99% said that they still see value in SEO. Okay, so then you say, okay, it's SEMrush, they sell, of course, SEO products, so the audience may be a bit biased. But then I had an event just I think 1 or 2 months ago where I did a talk on SEO and GEO. And I did a poll. And when I asked how many of you are using generative AI, I had, there were a few people, I would say maybe a quarter or more, who use generative AI for search. But then when I asked them how many of them are using Google for search, it was like everyone. So the reality is yes, people are using now these new methods of searching for information, but they still also use the old school thing, and everybody still uses it. So I do see that there's going to be a moment where AI searches are eating more and more into the pie of Google searches, but it's not necessarily that it's like an Avon or existence, right? So SEO is still going to be around. Maybe at some point the pie will slightly get slower, but there's also a new pie being baked, so it's not just stealing from the other table.
That was interesting. Let's get into that. All right, so look. But we're saying acronyms. I like to always be clear because it might not be.
Oh, yes.
So search engine optimization, right? So here's the deal, right? We've been talking about search engine optimization. I mean, this is like a decade, 2 decades. That's you have a website. How do we now make it searchable on Google? What do we put in with certain keywords? And you're right. No one's talking about that overall anymore, right? And it almost begs. I mean, because you have AI right now that you can set up an agent, you can set up a literal clone that looks human-like to market whatever you're selling. And SEO just seems so in the past. So help me out here. Let's dive into why SEO is so important.
I mean, it's so important for the reasons it has been around. It's like a great way of reaching people on the journey at the right moment. So if you are, like, let's say, a fintech company, you can target them at the right moment where they may either, look for solutions, and your product may be one of them, or they may be even already, exploring different options, and you can also enter that discussion. So with SEO, literally what you want to try to do is be present at those thought processes of people where they either look to solve things or actually buy something and compare stuff. Because if you achieve to be in that conversation, well, you can actually guide and influence that conversation, right? You can pick out the benefits or the pros and cons of your product versus the other ones to make it pretty clear that yours is like the way to go. And I think that's really, really powerful. And it's kind of like an organic channel that I think is really, really valuable, because I always like to compare it a little bit to buying a house and renting, right? So there's a lot of times in marketing, you have the discussion, do you go into search engine optimization by creating lots of content, or do you invest, let's say, in paid ads? So you have like very direct feedback, instantly it goes out to a lot of people, and then they either click on it or not, and then convert or not. And both of them have their place. So I'm not saying like one is the right one or not, but I think what people a lot of times forget is that in terms of SEO, you're kind of like playing the buying a house thing, right? You're building some value up over time. And the moment you stop investing in it, like if for whatever reason at some point you need to stop investing in it, it will still continue to generate, value for a foreseeable period in time. Whereas whenever you shut down the paid ads channels, literally the next day you're out. So compared to the housing situation, it's like the moment you stop paying your rent, you're pretty much out of the door, right? And everything that you paid up in the last 5-10 years, well, it's not really generating any value anymore.
So listen, you might not know this, and you probably don't. But I've been a real estate investor for a while. That's like one of my biggest quote unquote side hustles. And I love the analogy, right? Because as you were talking about it, instantly got it. So I love it. Let's go further with this analogy and really sink it home. All right. So search engine optimization and building content, that's like buying a home. So you own that property. Let's just say it's like buying a rental home because you make money off of it, right? You don't live there per se. So when we talk about that, what aspects are we talking about? Are we saying SEO strictly on the company's blog page? Are we saying SEO from putting a LinkedIn article out, linking back to the website? Like, what are the different flavors of building this content for SEO?
Yeah, so traditionally it's been really the kind of like old school tactics. It was like, everybody, let's just do like a blog. Let's put, a lot of keywords in it. And then maybe buy a lot of like links from, dubious websites or not. And that kind of like worked for a long time. And then of course, like Google keeps, flashing out new algorithms of the search engines to actually create better user experiences. So their vision is to, have searches and results shown to users that are very relevant and helpful. So the change right now that's happening, and it's already been happening for a long time, is you want to, of course, still be publishing, because, at the end of the day, you need to have content on your website. So there's actually pages to crawl and, content for engines to understand and then show to people. But it's been a lot of work now necessarily in the last years, I think probably even half decade or more, where it's the offsite SEO side as well. So you want to make sure you build up links to your domain that come from actually relevant, high quality, high traffic and high, very powerful sites that point to your website. At the same time, also from a PR perspective, it's not just about the links. So a lot of times also just like the brand mentions are really powerful. And what has been, let's say, the one of the, probably in the last 4 or 5 years, one of the biggest rises in terms of SEO factors has been also the social media side of things. So, the social pointers that show that your content is performing and point to what you have published, that is now also very, very powerful and being, included by search engines as they try to evaluate whether to put your content to the very top or something else. So there's been a bit of a change, and I think it's been a change for the better, because at the end of the day, it helps to showcase the actual valuable content. Because of course you do have the PR side, the link building side that you can kind of like influence, with financial incentives. So you can basically, with a lot of sites, you can still just pay to get a backlink or pay to get published. But I think the social media side is one where, yes, you can work with influencers and stuff, but I think if you really do it genuinely, it's a bit harder to do, but it's also way more powerful because you can reach more people. And having this factor validate your content is incredibly powerful. Again, especially if you go all the way back to what we started this conversation with about trust. Having people on social media, actual people, that exist and post content regularly and have friends that they can influence. Having them talk about your products or engage with what you share and communicate, that's fantastic.
Now speaking of content, right? Now we all know there's different AI tools. How does AI? Do you feel? Look, I've been in the industry long enough to remember writing like content without the assistance of a machine, just me like actually like writing from the top of my head with research and stuff like that. But now with AI, man, we put a couple of words in there and it just say, shoot me a paragraph on this. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I mean, I see that it's true that with AI now we reach the stage where content has become some sort of like a commodity, really. So anybody very cheaply and instantly can create lots of content. What I see, in the last years being in that space and playing around with those tools and seeing people use it in different ways, as yes, if you kind of like leave AI content unchecked and you don't really give it a lot of context and things to work on, what you get out of is pretty basic stuff. So if you ask it to write an article, at first it will sound, oh wow, this is like amazing. It wrote like this entire thing. But then when you actually look into it, there are like a lot of things that, put you a bit off. So what I think is going to happen is, this basic content, it's usually very predominant in the top of the funnel type of content, very content that doesn't really go very much in depth about problems, but more tries to explain stuff. And I think what's happening now with AI is that a lot of companies are testing it to basically try to flesh out as much content as possible to rank for a lot of different keywords. But I think what people underestimate or probably don't think about as much is everybody has access to that same tool. So if everybody uses the same tools to produce content that's very basic, well, it's going to look pretty similar. So at the end of the day, what Google is going to do when it has like thousands and thousands of content is the same. Where if the quality and the length and everything else is the same, well, the differentiating factor may very well just be the brand power and the domain authority. So in my opinion, unless you happen to be like a very strong brand, which is, very popular and has strong authority in your space, you can flash a lot of content, but you're not really going to see the performance because you're going to be, placed below those companies. So yes, you can create a lot of content more cheaply, but in my opinion, it's questionable what the return is going to be. I don't say that it's a strategy that doesn't work for everyone, because I think there may be still a lot of niche industries where you can, if you really go after very specific, very detailed long-tail keywords, there's a space where perhaps if you're quick and you're one of the first ones in the foreseeable future, you may still have benefits with this basic content, but it's going to disappear over time. So that's like one part to keep in mind. And then there's this whole other story is what is happening with search engines. Like we have on one side this new type of engines, which are the AI powered one. So it can be a competitor to Google, like, even on Perplexity or something, you can search. They will give you like these AI summaries. And now even Google is doing that since a couple of years, I think a year ago or so. So what happens with these AI summaries, they basically target this basic content that you created with AI as well. So that even takes away a lot of the clicks that you would have received from this side of things before. So It's a discussion that I see with a lot of, especially when you maybe speak to non-CMOs. So if you speak with CEOs that are maybe not as involved with marketing, they have this misconception a lot of times that, oh, great, like we don't need to have the writers now. We don't need to have the marketing team. So yeah, we just do AI content and, that's going to save us X amount of money. And then we're going to have the same or better performance. But the reality doesn't really show that this is working. And I'm quite sure that the longer we are on the AI journey, the less likely this is going to be the less likely this is going to be performed the way you want to. Like Google is already constantly flashing out new algorithms, and already last year, I think around March, one of the most recent ones, it didn't talk about AI content per se, but it did talk about low quality, kind of like basic content that doesn't really have a lot of uniqueness. And this is something that they were targeting. So indirectly, for me, the translation was we targeting AI content, but they just try to, not use that word necessarily. So those changes are happening.
That's interesting. So what's the lesson from that? It's like, okay, like I always looked at AI and everybody says, and I'm not saying in certain cases it has not replaced certain functions, but I've always felt as a technologist, the power of any technology is when it's used in conjunction with a human being, right? It's to augment whatever that is, right? So if you look at it like, take Microsoft's word, a co-pilot, okay, how can it's the same concept, right? You're in Spain, right? Now, if I wanted to get to Spain, the best way for me to get there is to fly there. Can I charter some boat like we're in the 1700s and figure, I guess it's possible, but that will be a lot slower than actually getting on a plane. To get on a plane, what do I need? I need a pilot. I need a plane. I need certain tools at that disposal to get there. So I always felt, the real power of things like AI is to take someone with somewhat of a domain expertise, plug in the AI, let them provide extremely good prompts, and then go back and forth with the tool and make the best potential product. In this case, we're talking about content that there is, and dive into it. And I think that's powerful, extremely powerful, as opposed to just what you said. If we're all just creating we're all in the same industry, and we're targeting the same people, and then we're just saying, okay, write this. You're right. I've never differentiated between my black beans. Like one bean is look like another bean. I don't differentiate it. I go, I just want a whole thing of black beans on top of my rice, right? So I agree. So it was something we were talking about offline about ethical AI and marketing. And can you touch on that?
Yeah, I think it's something that's very easy to forget right now. So, maybe first just one little step back to what you said. I love that, what you said, it amplifies basically your skill set or what you already do. And one of my most favorite analogies there, it's a friend of mine, he came up with that. It's kind of like AI is like giving a machine gun to a monkey. So it's like pretty unpredictable. It can create you like very wild things. So in the end, it's you want to make sure this supervision, right? So you need the human who uses his expertise to use AI in his field in order to actually do the job that you wanted to do. And even I think last week, I saw like a statistic, people who use AI correctly, they can boost efficiency by, 40% or something. But if you use it wrongly, it can hurt productivity by 19%. So again, that's kind of like, just always remember the monkey, in this type of discussions.
I'm laughing about that because I literally saw about a year ago a social media meme, and these I don't know where they were, a bunch of soldiers, and they had a gun, and they had some pet monkey, and the monkey somehow got the gun and figured out how to shoot it. People like, at first it was funny, but then at first they were terrified. So when you said it, I just had like a visual. That was great. I love that analogy, man. You know what? Who's your friend? Let's quote him. Let's make him immortal right now. Who's your friend? Quote him.
So it's Guido. He's a designer. I can maybe afterwards share that, like his LinkedIn profile after this call. Yeah.
I love it, man. That's an excellent analogy. I'm gonna start running with. That's pretty cool. So yeah,
yeah,
man.
going back to ethics. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, going back to ethics. Yeah, I think for me, the most important thing is always with any technology, because we always have these super hype technologies that come up, and then this is supposed to be the saving grace and like the holy grail that's going to solve all our problems as a society. So one of the best examples was blockchain before, now it's AI. What I always like to do when you have these hype technologies is to actually, okay, let's take a course. Like it doesn't have to be like a whole master program, but let's do like a small course to actually understand some of the fundamentals of the technology. And I think if you try to dissect AI, and again, I'm not the most technical person, so I'm quite sure in this podcast you had people who are way better at explaining AI to people than me. But I think from what I picked up, which I think is very essential, is that at its base, AI is working with the data it was fed. It learns patterns, and then it uses what it learned to use probabilities to give you an output. Well, what happens with AI? The data that it has been fed a lot of times can be digital content or any other type of content. And this content comes with bias. So if we leave the AI content unchecked, or we don't know how to, counterbalance that, is we will just contribute to reinforcing biases that already have been taking place. And I think for a prosperous, inclusive society, we don't want that. We want to make sure that we actually, counterbalance any biases that may exist, and making sure that AI is not contributing to more problems that we have as a world. Because at the end of the day, AI itself is just a tool, right? It's neither good, it's neither bad. It will be depend on us how we're using it to see what outcome it will have. So again, I think you want to be aware of the issues AI has on one side with the biases, on the second side with the hallucination, which is kind of like built in how the technology works. We work with probabilities, so it's not always going to be 100% spot on with what it gives you as an output. And then I think just in the way you apply AI as well, I mean, you can build a lot of amazing things with AI, but you could technically also use it for bad things. So at the end of the day, it's going to be up to us how we're using that. So I think that's a big topic to keep in mind. And especially when you think marketers, I think that's where AI ethics comes into play even more, because we a lot of times are the ones who produce content. So if we are aware of those limitations and the problems of AI, we can actually counterbalance that and make sure that we create a better future for people.
That's cool. Listen, Clemens, we're at time. I obviously, you can tell I could talk to you for hours and hours, because this is we and so many things I want to talk to you about that we didn't touch on. So you're officially a friend of the show. You're one of our fintech marketer expert friends of the show. And you know what? I'm gonna say this now. I don't know when. We have to look at a schedule. I want to bring you back on because I want to touch on fintech marketing aspect of building a community. This is something you've been very successful at, and I want to learn how other companies can build communities within their target market. And selfishly, I also want to learn for myself, right? But I want to have a show on that. I want to really dive into it, because we dove into, we were gonna like touch on it, but it was so many other parts of this discussion that's so vast. But I definitely want to circle back and have a show about building a fintech community on I'm going to come up with some cool title, but it's going to be centered around how to leverage a fintech community for your marketing efforts. I definitely want to talk to you about that. So one of the things that we do at the end of our show is we give our guests the floor to talk about anything you want to talk about, how people can find you and so forth. So I'm going to come off the stage and I'm going to let you do that, Clemens.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Namdi. It's been a great time being here. So maybe as a closer, what I would like to say, first of all, just as a takeaway for people, I know AI, at least initially, has created also a lot of anxiety for a lot of people, and marketers worry about the jobs as well. So what I want to say is hopefully people understand the message also here that we don't want to leave AI unchecked. It's not going to replace us in the near future. So marketers, the message is try to work with AI, try to make it work for you, because I think that's what is going to make sure that you're going to stay relevant in the future. Personally, I even see it a bit like, if you leave if you don't know how to leverage AI, in a couple of years, it's going to become like the internet. If you don't know how to use the internet today, nobody's going to hire you. So if you don't know how to use AI, nobody's going to hire you in the future. So just take this away. But basically, yes, just less AI anxiety. We can make it work for us. So it's something positive. That's my main message. And apart from that, just a bit about myself. So of course, with Barcelona FinTech, we're trying to build, the community in Barcelona for anything related to FinTech. Our vision is basically to make Catalonia a major FinTech hub in Europe. And we see the potential here with the amount of startups and FinTech companies we have. So anybody who wants to join that mission or vision, or anybody who wants to volunteer, or is perhaps thinking about coming to Barcelona, or is anytime visiting in Barcelona and is in FinTech, just reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to talk. I'm very easily, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm quite present there too. So just shoot me a message. I'm very open to connecting with anybody. Just let me know, what I can help you with. And then of course, lastly, I work for Hello Operator. So if you need any support with, leveraging AI for FinTech marketing, just shoot us a message and we're happy to help. I'm a big fan of providing value first. So I'm more than happy to have a 30-minute, free consultation to actually show you what we can do and actually help you directly. And then we take it from there. So again, it was a very great time here with Namdi, really great show. Definitely happy to be back. So we have more time to touch on the community building aspect of it, which is really, really rewarding and really fantastic. And other than that, just try to stay curious, learn more about AI, try to use it where it makes sense, and just be very careful about how you do it, and you're going to be good.
Excellent. Clemens, thank you very much. While you were talking, I did put the link to Hello Operator and BCN Networks. This is the BCN Network link that Clemens mentioned, and here's company, the Hello Operator link. Also to all, thank you very much for tuning in. We really appreciate it. But we notice that some of you tuning in have not yet subscribed to the Tech Behind FinTech. So I implore you, please subscribe to the Tech Behind FinTech. We're at Tech Behind FinTech. Subscribe. Every week, you're going to get the free newsletter, which will keep your fingers on the pulse of FinTech. I had a great compliment by one of my guys that I train with, Steve. He said he uses the newsletter that we send out, and he uses it to update his team during his weekly meeting. So it's definitely, he's in finance. So it's definitely a value. Go to the techbehindfintech.com/subscribe. And every week you'll get a newsletter with all the news going on in the FinTech industry, along with cybersecurity things going on, and also our upcoming guests for the week and past weeks. So you will not miss a beat or miss an episode. And also, not talking about it yet, but we are launching a new show, a YouTube specific show in the next few months, and that you'll have more updates on that. So on that note, Clemens, man, thank you very much. Today has been a great conversation. I learned more about FinTech marketing, and I love it. So I definitely want to dive into the community aspect when we book you for the next show. To all, thank you very much. It's something I always say, whether you watch the show live, whether you're going to watch it tomorrow or next year, I thank you for your viewership. I thank you for all the DMs you sent us. We've been at this for a few years now, and your support is everything. So please, just thank you, man. Have a great weekend. Make it phenomenal. Cheers.
Cheers, and thanks to you, Namdi, as well. It's been a pleasure being here. Love what you do. We talked financial education, and you basically contribute to helping with that. So continue doing that. I'm happy to be back, and thanks so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it, Clemens. Take care. Nice. Oh, so now it's awesome because now I have an additional. I have a friend in Barcelona, so anytime I'm out there, I'm gonna look you up, my guy.
Yeah, definitely. Shoot me a message. I'll be happy to meet. Take care, man.
Yes, sir. Cheers.
Take care, everyone. Take care.
Understanding the technology that powers the money is essential. Knowing the business drivers that inspire how the money is made is crucial. Bridging the gap between the mind of the technologist and the mind of the business is monumental. That is what TBF is all about. Let's start this never-ending conversation. It's time.